Welcome to the third Sunday in Easter. Perhaps you've noticed that we're filming in a different room today. This is because the windows are being put in over at St. Philip's, and so the sermon comes to us today from the rectory. One of the exercises I sometimes use in preparation for writing a sermon is to read all the set passages from the Bible and look for a key word or emotion. This week, a word absolutely screamed at me. It was the word heart. In the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, verse 37, Peter, addressing the first converts, says that when they heard of Jesus' fate and felt their responsibility in his crucifixion, they were cut to the heart. Then in the first letter of Peter, we hear about holiness in Christian life, where he describes obedience to the truth as having genuine mutual love for one another deeply from the heart. And finally, Luke describes the walk to Emmaus, the second of Jesus' resurrection appearances, which, upon reflection, Clopas and his companion recognise that their hearts were burning within them as they encountered the risen Lord on the road and as he interpreted the scriptures to them. Our hearts, as the Dowager Duchess of Downton Abbey concedes, our hearts do not exist solely for the purpose of pumping blood. The heart has its many vagaries. It can be hardened. It can be opened. It can be cut deeply. It can burn with passion. And the heart can be the place of deep pain and of the deepest love. Perhaps in these days of lockdown, like me, you have been chomping into books on your must-read list. For some reason, I decided to read Gravity and Grace by Simone Weil. Her thoughts about love are mind-stretching, to say the least. She says, God's love for us is not the reason for which we should love him. God's love for us is the reason for us to love ourselves. And in loving ourselves, as Peter suggests, we can love one another deeply from the heart. While we are at home more than usual, it can be tempting to turn inwards, to concentrate on our own needs, keep ourselves healthy, entertained and safe. We might even find that we have moved into a kind of survival mode, where we feel more strongly than ever that we must protect ourselves. There is a risk that in isolation we find ourselves operating from a model of scarcity. We all saw this working out as there was a run on toilet paper, and when we couldn't buy things like flour or rice or pasta. The love of God is never in short supply. The love of God is infinite. There is always enough love. We limit not the love of God by our poor reach of mind, to borrow from the well-known hymn. We do not need to hoard God's love. Instead, we are required, impelled to share it, to feel it burning within us, stretching us so that the great love of God flows more freely into the world. The story of the walk to Emmaus is one of intense emotions. Clopas and his companion are walking away from Jerusalem with heavy hearts. They are confused about all that has occurred, and they are full of questions to which there are no answers. What they want more than anything is to be with Jesus like before, to sit around the table with him, to break bread and share the cup. As they walk along, they meet this stranger. But we know this is not a stranger. It is Jesus. We know this because of Luke's account of the good news about Jesus Christ. We know the story of Jesus' ministry, his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. And if we allow ourselves to enter deeply into these stories of the Gospels, then we can meet the risen Jesus whenever we choose. Some of you may know that I enjoy making a bit of art. This image is one I did in response to my entering deeply into the story of Jesus' visit to the home of Mary and Martha. Mary sat at Jesus' feet and listened to him. Using my imagination, I allowed myself to be like Mary, sitting at Jesus' feet, leaning against his heavy garments, where I could feel his warmth, his inner strength, and I could hear his voice. In that moment, I knew Jesus as my friend, and I had a profound sense of his presence with me. My heart was strangely warmed, and there was a deep sense of God's love and purpose. St. Ignatius says that the imagination is not something childish, it's not something flippant or something not to be trusted. Rather, our imagination is part of God's way of connecting with us, heart to heart. In reading the scriptures imaginatively, we can draw close to God. We can draw closer to Jesus. As those men walked along the road to Emmaus, Jesus interpreted the scriptures to them. He didn't just expect them to understand what they meant. Jesus helped them to understand. He wanted them to understand. He wanted them to recognize him and to know him as their friend. Once those men on the road had come under Jesus' spell, they say to him, "Stay with us." These are words of invitation. Jesus, still unknown but becoming the known stranger, was going to head off down the road, but instead he responded to their invitation to stay. If we want to know Jesus as our friend, if our deepest longing is to experience the saving power of the risen Christ in our lives, then we must begin by inviting him to stay with us. We are inviting Jesus then to come under our roof, not as a stranger, but as a friend who walks the road of life with us, a friend who is able to laugh with us, cry with us, and sometimes to tell us to shape up when we have gone wrong. A good friend will always have a positive influence on us. If we hang around with a friend who is kind, loving, thoughtful, honest, generous, then their example helps us to be a better person. With Jesus as our friend, we are naturally drawn into becoming a person like him. This is called becoming holy, something Peter instructs the new converts about in 1 Peter chapter 1. As he who called us is holy, we are to be holy ourselves. We are to love one another deeply from our hearts, in the certain knowledge that God's love is more than enough, infinite and eternal. our hearts burn within us as we contemplate the presence of the risen Christ. Christ is risen. Alleluia. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.